Welcome to a Moment in Time podcast. I'm your host, Eric.
And I'm Freya.
Imagine, imagine you are a detective.
Right.
And you've just been handed this massive, decades-old cold case.
Oh, man, the kind that takes up a whole room.
Exactly, yeah. You walk into the precinct's evidence room, and it is just packed to the ceiling with boxes. You start opening them up, and you find these incredible things for this case. You've got microscopic fiber analysis, 3D topographical maps, matching blood spatter from a totally different artifact located across the world, rare botanical samples, just, a mountain of data pointing in one very specific direction.
Right.
But then, over in the corner, you find a single muddy footprint near the crime scene. You test the mud, it points to a completely different suspect, and based on that one footprint alone, you throw out the entire room full of evidence, and you just slam the file shut.
Yeah, I mean, you'd be fired, or at least laughed out of the department, Because declaring a case solved by completely ignoring a mountain of contradictory data, it's confirmation bias on a spectacular scale.
It really is. And welcome to today's deep dive. We are thrilled to have you with us because today we are opening up the ultimate cold case for you. We're looking at the Shroud of Turin.
A topic that just never seems to go away.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And we've gathered a really fascinating stack of sources for you today. We're pulling from comprehensive historical reviews, like Raymond J. Schneider's Weighing All the Evidence, some brand new abstracts from 2025 forensic and archaeological journals, and historical timelines from the Magus Center mapping out exactly where this clot has been.
It's a lot of material to get through.
It is. But our mission for you today is actually pretty simple. We want to explore exactly why the famous 1988 carbon dating test, the one that loudly proclaimed the shroud was just a medieval fake, didn't actually close the case at all.
Far from it. Because when you actually take a breath and, look at the entire data set, the scientific, forensic, and historical clues are just mind-bending. The sources reveal a mystery that is still, honestly, very much wide open.
So to do this right, we have to start with the biggest elephant in the room, 1988.
Right, the carbon-14 tests.
Yeah. Labs in Arizona, Oxford, and Zurich all tested pieces of the cloth, and they dated it somewhere between 1260 and 1390 AD. And for a lot of the general public, that was it. That was the end of the story. Case closed. It's a 14th century forgery. But if science supposedly proved that back in the 80s, why are modern forensic researchers still publishing peer-reviewed papers about it?
Well, because the 1988 carbon dating is actually becoming a textbook example of how scientific inquiry can sometimes just fall victim to its own rush to judgment.
Really?
Yeah. When modern researchers look back at the methodology used in those tests, there are glaring issues. The scientists took samples from only one single, highly handled corner of the cloth.
Wait, just one corner? I thought standard protocol for dating something this large would be to, take samples from multiple different areas to get a reliable average.
That was the original protocol, yes. But it was abandoned at the last minute to minimize damage to the relics. So they literally snipped a piece from the very edge. And you have to remember, this is a section that had been grabbed, held, and just exposed to the elements during public exhibitions for centuries.
Oh, wow. This is the dirtiest part of the cloth.
Exactly. And the data they got back was fundamentally flawed due to a concept called inhomogeneous sampling.
Okay, let me make sure I'm following here.
Yeah.
Inhomogeneous sampling, that means the piece they tested chemically wasn't representative of the rest of the cloth.
Correct. When researchers like Brian Walsh later analyzed the raw data from those three labs, they discovered this wild mathematical anomaly. There was a linear gradient in the carbon dates.
A linear gradient, meaning what exactly?
Meaning the date the labs came up with actually changed depending on exactly how far the specific sample was from the edge of the cloth.
Oh, wait, seriously?
Yeah. One end of this tiny swatch dated older than the other end. If you are testing a single uniform piece of ancient fabric that was woven all at once, the carbon-14 decay should be entirely uniform across the whole thing.
Right, okay. I think of it like taking a pair of antique jeans, say from the 1800s. Eventually they get a tear, and someone patches that tear in the 1990s. If I come along years later and only take a fiber from that 1990s patch, I'm going to confidently tell you these jeans were made during the Clinton administration. I'm not dating the original jeans at all. I'm dating the repair.
That analogy actually lines up perfectly with the chemical reality of that specific corner of the shroud. Recent analysis of UV fluorescence images by John Morgan shows something staggering about the cloth.
What's that?
Well, the fluorescence lag, how the cloth reacts to ultraviolet light, it almost perfectly predicts the carbon date in that area. We are talking about a 99.93% correlation.
Wait, so the UV light is essentially highlighting the contamination?
Yes, exactly. It indicates heavy, localized contamination or patching exactly in the spot they snipped the 1988 sample from. And the chemistry backs this up, too. Later chemical analysis by Ray Rogers looked at a compound called vanillin.
Vanillin?
Like vanilla. Similar root, yeah.
Yeah.
It's naturally found in flax fibers, but it decays and disappears over time.
Okay, so if the cloth is medieval, it should still have plenty of vanillin. But if it's ancient, the vanillin should be totally gone.
Precisely. And in the main body of the shroud, there is a complete absence of vanillin, suggesting the main cloth is at least 1,300 years old.
Wow.
But the corner sample used for the carbon test, that specific piece did contain vanillin. It is chemically a completely different piece of fabric.
Okay, so the 1988 test sampled a contaminated corner.
Yep.
I get that. But let's just, play devil's advocate for a second.
Yeah.
Let's assume the 1980 date is right, and it is a medieval forgery. I struggle with this because of what I'd call the super forger problem.
Ooh, the super forger. Yes.
Right, because if this is a fake, the person who made it had to possess knowledge that literally didn't exist in the 1300s.
The logistical load for a medieval artisan to fake this is basically insurmountable. I mean, just look at the dirt. Forensic teams have found rare dirt, a very specific type of travertine aragonite embedded in the fibers, specifically on the nose, the knee, and the heel of the image.
Wait, travertine and aragonite? What is that?
It's a very specific limestone dust found in the tombs of Jerusalem.
Are you kidding?
No. So our 14th century forger would have had to, travel to Jerusalem, collect the specific microscopic dirt, and then rub it on the precise anatomical points where a person carrying a heavy beam would fall and hit the ground, not to mention using invisible first-century sewing techniques.
That is absurd. A medieval peasant isn't doing microscopic forensic staging.
Right. They're also not recreating the scourging marks of an ancient Roman flagrum.
A whip, right.
Yeah. The wounds on the back of the image perfectly match a Roman whip with lead weights. This was a torture device that hadn't been used for 1,000 years by the time the 1300s rolled around. A medieval artist wouldn't even know what the wound pattern looked like, let alone how to apply it flawlessly under the image.
But despite all this, back in the 80s, you had prominent figures totally dismissing it.
Oh, yeah. Edward Hall at Oxford called it a million-pound business of making faked relics. They suppressed the troubling statistical anomalies in their own data just to push a neat, tidy narrative.
Which brings up a massive question for us. If it isn't a 14th century painting, then physically, what is the image? Because everything you read in these 2025 forensic papers about how the image is actually constructed, it seems to defy human capability.
It really does. To understand the image, you first have to understand what it isn't. There is no pigment. There is no paint, no dye, no brush strokes, no cementing of fibers together.
Nothing. So how do we see a face?
The image is a monochromatic halftone. It sits entirely on the ultra-thin primary cell walls of the flax fiber. We're talking a fraction of a human hair in thickness.
That's incredibly thin.
Yeah, the discoloration does not penetrate the threads at all. And on top of that, it is a perfect photographic negative.
A photographic negative, which, and correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't even discovered until a photographer named Secondo Pia took the first picture of the shroud in 1898 and looked at his darkroom plate, right?
Right. So our hypothetical medieval forger would have had to paint a perfect photographic negative without using paint hundreds of years before photography was even conceptualized.
It's almost as if someone used an exquisitely fine, radioactive paintbrush that just barely kissed the surface of the linen, changing its color without soaking in. But what tool did that?
Well, you actually just used the right word, radiation. Some of the most compelling modern research posits that the image was caused by radiation. Specifically, James C. Porter's 2025 paper looks at the radioactive isotope rubidium-87, which is naturally found in linen fibers. The theory explores how this isotope can undergo what's called beta decay.
Okay, I definitely need you to break down beta decay for me. What does that actually do to a piece of ancient fabric?
Okay, imagine a microscopic release of electrons. It doesn't burn the cloth like a fire does. Rather, this specific type of electron irradiation causes a rapid, localized aging of the very outer layer of the fiber.
So it's aging it instantly.
Exactly. It's essentially a microscopic, highly precise scorch, almost like a localized sunburn to the flax. This process would cause exactly the kind of uniform yellowing of the primary cell walls that we see, and it would quench the UV fluorescence just as we observe on the shroud.
Wow. So the leading scientific theory right now is that the image is a highly specific, microscopic, low-energy radiation burn.
Yeah.
That is wild.
It is, and the physics get even stranger when you look at the 3D aspect. In 1976, scientists put photos of the shroud into a VP8 image analyzer.
A VP8 analyzer.
Yeah, this was a machine used by NASA to map terrain on planets. It translates the light and dark areas of a 2D image into vertical relief, so 3D depth.
But wait, if I take a picture of a normal painting, say a Rembrandt, and put it in that NASA machine, what happens?
It comes out looking like a distorted monster because normal paintings use lighting from the side or shading to trick the eye into seeing depth. But the VP8 analyzer reads actual spatial data. When they put the shroud image in, it generated a perfectly proportional 3D human face and body.
It actually worked.
Flawlessly. The shroud image actually encodes pure spatial depth data. The darker the image on the cloth, the closer the physical body was to the fabric.
I really want you, the listener, to think about the implications of that for a second. How could anyone in the 1300s encode perfect 3D spatial depth data into a piece of linen 6 centuries before 3D mapping software existed?
They couldn't. It is scientifically unjustifiable to classify this as a medieval painting today, and we haven't even touched the blood evidence yet.
Oh, right.
Yeah, Kelly Kearse's 2025 paper focuses heavily on the serum rings around the blood stains on the shroud.
Serum rings. What does the presence of serum tell a forensic expert?
It tells us the body was not washed before it was wrapped in the cloth. When blood coagulates naturally on a wound, it forms specific, distinct borders of clear serum separating from the red blood cells.
Right, like when a scab forms.
Exactly. But if a body is washed, it inhibits that specific coagulation process from happening properly. The blood physics on the shroud point to authentic, unwashed wounds that coagulated naturally and transferred directly to the linen.
See, that unwashed blood actually provides an incredible bridge to another massive piece of this puzzle. Because if the blood physics point to an authentic body, can we trace that blood to anything else in history? Which brings us to the Sudarium of Oviedo.
Yes, the Sudarium. It's a small towel, currently kept in a cathedral in Spain. Tradition holds that it was the cloth used to cover the head of Jesus immediately after he was taken down from the cross, before the actual burial.
And the historical trail for this specific towel is much less debated than the shroud, isn't it?
Much less. The documented history shows the Sudarium left Jerusalem around 614 AD to escape a Persian invasion. The shroud, meanwhile, purportedly left Jerusalem way back around 40 AD. So historically speaking, these two cloths have not been in the same room together for roughly 1,400 years.
But here's the kicker for you guys listening. Despite being separated for 14 centuries, forensic testing shows both cloths contain type AB blood.
Yes.
And when researchers take the image of the shroud's face and overlay it with the blood stains on the Sudarium, they match.
They don't just match, they align with over 120 points of congruence.
120 points.
Yeah. And to put that in perspective, in modern forensic science, fingerprint analysts often only need about a dozen points of congruence to declare a definitive, legally binding match in a courtroom. Finding 120 points of congruence is staggering.
It's like finding a unique piece of a jigsaw puzzle that perfectly fits a piece on the other side of the planet that it hasn't touched in a millennium.
Exactly. It proves, beyond a reasonable doubt, that both of these cloths covered the exact same wounded head. And if we connect this back to our overarching mission today, unpacking that 1988 carbon date, the Sudarium completely dismantles it.
Right, because of the timeline.
Yes. If the Sudarium has a rock-solid, well-documented history going all the way back to 614 AD, and its complex bloodstains perfectly match the shroud, it is logically impossible for the shroud to have been whipped up by an artist in medieval France in the 1300s.
It just breaks the medieval timeline entirely.
Completely.
But, that forces us to ask a really difficult question. If the shroud is actually ancient, where was it hiding before it suddenly appeared in historical records in Liray, France in 1349? Because I feel like if you have the burial cloth of Jesus, you don't just shove it in a closet. You build a cathedral around it.
Well, you might build a cathedral around it today, but you wouldn't in the first few centuries of Christianity. Historians track the shroud through what they call the Great Silences. These are extended periods where it vanishes entirely from public view.
I'm still hung up on why they would keep the ultimate proof of their faith a total secret, though.
We have to look at the cultural context at the time. First off, In Jewish tradition, a burial shroud that had touched a dead body was considered ritually unclean. Handling it, let alone displaying it, was a major taboo. Furthermore, in the early days, an image of God was actually seen as blasphemous by some factions.
Oh, right. So displaying it would be highly controversial even among believers.
Extremely controversial, and outside the church, during the first few centuries of Roman persecution, possessing an object like this was literally a death sentence. And then later on, you had periods of iconoclasm in the Byzantine Empire, where religious images were actively hunted down and destroyed by the authorities, keeping it a secret, folding it up, hiding it in the city walls. That was the only way to ensure its survival.
But even when something goes underground, it leaves ripples in history. And the sources link the shroud to a very famous early Christian legend, the Dandelion.
Yes, the Dandelion was a legendary cloth that supposedly displayed the miraculous face of Christ, said to be held by King Abgar of Edessa. Now, historical texts describe the Dandelion as a tetradiplon, which is a very specific Greek word translating to a cloth folded in 4 and then doubled.
So 8 layers.
Right. And if you take the 14-foot Shroud of Turin and you fold it exactly into 8 layers...
Let me guess. It displays exactly one thing perfectly centered in a landscape format.
Yep. Just the face. The leading theory is that the Dandelion was actually the shroud, folded up and framed so only the face was visible, likely to hide the fact that it was an unclean full-body burial shroud.
And this hidden in plain sight face, it radically changed art history. Because before the 6th century, early depictions of Jesus varied wildly. Sometimes he's young and beardless, sometimes he looks like a Roman god, but suddenly Christian art standardizes almost overnight.
Right, they start using what art historians call the Vignon markings, named after Paul Vignon. He identified 15 specific facial features that just suddenly appeared in Byzantine art in the 6th century. You see a 3-sided square between the brows, a stark V shape at the bridge of the nose, a distinctly forked beard, an enlarged left nostril.
And those aren't just stylistic choices, right?
No, not at all. They are exact anatomical anomalies, swellings, and wounds visible on the shroud. The artists were copying the Dandelion, completely unaware that they were actually painting the specific forensic details of the folded shroud.
It acts like a watermark across centuries of art. But it isn't just paintings of faces. We also have to look at this manuscript called the Prey Codex.
The Prey Codex, yes. It's a Hungarian manuscript dated between 1192 and 1195 AD. Now keep in mind, this is over a century before that 1988 carbon test claimed the shroud was even created.
Right.
The Codex features an illustration of Jesus being prepared for burial.
And what makes this illustration so special?
The artist drew the burial cloth with a very specific, unique herringbone weave, which is the exact, highly unusual weave of the Shroud of Turin. But even more incredibly, the illustration shows a specific pattern of L-shaped burn marks on the cloth, known as the poker holes.
I've seen pictures of those. Those L-shaped burns are on the shroud today, and we know they completely predate the massive fire that damaged the cloth in 1532.
Right.
So a Hungarian artist in 1192 is clearly looking at the Shroud of Turin burns, and the timeline just doesn't lie.
It doesn't. And if we zoom in from the art history down to the microscopic level, we find botanical evidence that corroborates that whole geographic journey. Max Free, a Swiss criminologist, he took sticky tape samples from the shroud to analyze the pollen trapped in the fibers, and he identified 49 distinct plant species.
And let me guess, these weren't plants you find growing in 14th century France.
Not at all. There was a heavy concentration of pollens native to the Middle East, specifically the steppes, the Negev Desert, and the Dead Sea area. And crucially, many of these were insect-borne pollens, not wind-borne.
Oh, meaning they couldn't just blow onto the cloths from miles away.
Exactly. They had to be deposited by direct physical contact. The most logical explanation is that these pollens came from the burial ointments, the spices, and the flowers laid directly on the body in the tomb.
See, this is why diving into these sources with you is so rewarding. History isn't just a list of documented dates and royal decrees. Sometimes history is a literal forensic crime scene. You have insect-borne pollen grains from a Middle Eastern desert, a 12th century Hungarian drawing showing specific burn marks, and microscopic anatomical anomalies copied into 6th century art. They all step in to speak for the missing paperwork during those great silences.
They do. And when you weigh that deeply flawed carbon dating against the radiation physics, the Sudarium blood match, the botanical evidence, and the historical breadcrumbs, the medieval forgery hypothesis simply collapses under the weight of the data.
It really flips the popular narrative entirely, because we've all been taught that science proved it was a fake in 1988. But the reality is that the carbon dating was a victim of terrible sampling. When you look at modern forensics, 3D spatial data perfectly matched 1,400-year-old bloodstains and ancient desert pollen, they all point toward a first-century origin that our modern science still cannot fully explain.
It serves as a really potent reminder that true scientific inquiry requires looking at all the evidence, especially when it challenges our assumptions. You can't just look at the muddy footprint. You have to look at the whole room.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up, we want to leave you with one final mind-bending detail from the sources to chew on. A recent analysis of the microscopic dust that had been vacuumed from the shroud during a restoration.
Yeah, that 2024 data.
Right. Do you know what they found in that dust?
It's a profound detail, really.
They found DNA statistics from people all over the world. I want you to really think about what that implies. Think about how many thousands of unnamed people across centuries, across empires, hidden in secret locations or standing in massive cathedrals, have stood exactly where this cloth stood. They breathed over it, they wept over it, they touched it. They left a microscopic, invisible human legacy that is now completely intertwined with the physical mystery of the cloth itself.
The shroud carries not just the image of one man, but the microscopic trace of humanity's interaction with it over 2 millennia.
So the next time someone tells you they closed the book on a mystery because of one single piece of evidence, think about that evidence room. Think about the 3D maps, the ancient pollen, the matching blood. Because sometimes that one muddy footprint you thought solved the case. It's just a 14th century patch on a much, much older story.
That wraps it up for this deep dive. Thanks for watching A Moment in Time podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe.